Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
Today we're going to talk about a conspiracy theory legend, and maybe there's an asterisk after that because it deviates a little bit from what a conventional conspiracy theorist might be defined as. But today's guest is Gabriel Kennedy, who wrote an entire book on Robert Anton Wilson called Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. And this is going to be a great way to just get more acquainted with Robert Anton Wilson's particular line of thinking. And just we'll get into a whole bunch of different tangents and rabbit holes. So first of all, Gabriel, thanks so much for coming on to the show. I'll let you do all of the sort of plugs up front. So let people know where they can find you, where they can get your book, everything.
Sure. Yeah. Thomas, thank you for having me on the show, man. It's great to be here today. And yes, my name is Gabriel Kennedy, aka Prop Anon. That's short for Propaganda Anonymous. I've been a musician and a visual artist, a street artist for many years. Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson is my first book. I've written for other outlets like Boing Boing, Reality Sandwich, Mondo 2000, and my own websites, prop-anon.com and also chapelperilous.us. And chapelperilous.us, I'm constantly uploading, things concerning the book. And I am, I guess curating a Substack page, which is Gabriel Patrick Kennedy, I think .substack, or no, .com, one of those things, substack.com. And, you could see some of my writings on there and whatnot. So, this is my first book. And I've Wilson was like one of my main teachers. I discovered his work in high school. Years later, I interviewed him in 2003, the day after the premiere of a documentary that was, made on his life. So I interviewed him on July 24th, 2003. A year later, I joined what was called the Maybe Logic Academy, which was Wilson's cutting edge, asynchronous remote learning website that there were a number of teachers, writers who, had courses to teach. Wilson was one of them. Others were involved in that were, Douglas Rushkoff, Are You Serious?, Starhawk, Peter Carroll, and Turo Ali. Those are just a few off the top of my head. It was such a great experience. And during that time, I just got deeper and deeper in studying Wilson's work. And I just never stopped. And I started this book a number of years ago and completed it just recently, put it out in late October, and it's been selling really well. I self-published the book, so I guess I'm, the publisher in cahoots with Amazon and Lulu Press, which is pretty amazing, this new era of self-publishing that's allowed to writers. So I did that just kind of as an experiment to see how it'll go. And it's going really well so far. So yeah, and just doing these podcasts right now. And I'm really, like I said, I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, congrats on cutting out the middleman too. It's a great time to be alive for a publisher in some regards, right? And you reached out to me, but it was so like there was so much synchronicity in this, because I had just like the week that I heard from you, I had just watched Maybe Logic for the first time, paying attention. I think it had like been on in the background a couple of times, but this is the documentary on Robert Anton Wilson's life. And it gave me a completely different perspective, because I think that for the first 10 or 20 years that I became familiar with him, it was through the Illuminatus Trilogy, and then it was through Prometheus Rising. And I kind of just made all the assumptions on who he was as a person based on that and his Discordianism. So I kind of saw him almost as like a prankster or a troll, or maybe he was just being fun. And after watching Maybe Logic, I walked away with a completely different interpretation of this. One of the main ones, I guess I'll just lead with this question, but one of the things that took me the most by surprise was the sheer amount of optimism that Robert Anton Wilson sort of embodied. And like he was a professor of optimism. Like he would basically try and convince everyone to be the same kind of optimist that he was. And my brain almost did a divide by zero error moment, because conspiracy theory and optimism don't usually play in like the same sandbox in a way. They almost feel like they are mutually exclusive. So I'm curious, how do you sort of rectify these two seemingly like oil and water different ingredients here between conspiracy theory and optimism in the context of Robert Anton Wilson?
That's a great point, Thomas. Yeah. Squaring the radical optimism that Wilson had with his capacity to ingest like a ton of conspiracy theories and even look at the world through that lens every once in a while. I think that adds to what makes him unique and what makes him such a great writer. Late in his life, I think it's in that documentary, that Maybe Logic documentary, where Wilson said that two things fuel his art, and that's anger and optimism. And so I find that interesting as well. How could this person, I mean, that's the sign of intelligence, is the ability to hold two conflicting thoughts, within yourself without kind of going crazy. And that Wilson, this is what makes him so valuable as a writer, beyond just being a funny troll, if you will, because unlike, I don't know, I can't name any trolls offhand, but if Wilson is a troll, he walked the talk. At least he wasn't just, keyboard warring, being a keyboard warrior, beefing with people online or whatever. He embodied what he wrote about, and to be able to be such a radical optimist while, I guess, entertaining so many conspiracy theories. I think that just goes back to his kind of like his youth in a way. He was diagnosed with polio at the age of 2. And it's weird. I think he got like 2 separate bouts of polio around that age. And that was 1934 when he was 2 years old, and he got the polio. So this was years before Jonas Salk invented the polio vaccine. So Wilson is of that generation. There are a number of people that we probably know. I mean, if you know Alan Alda, he was in MASH. He's a great actor. He also had polio when he was a kid, as did so many people from that, as I said, generation. And Alda, like Wilson, there was no vaccine, but they received a relative cure from this system, I guess, called the Sister Kenny method, which was, we would see it now as just an alternative kind of body therapy invented by an Australian kind of nurse's aide named Sister Kenny. And that flew in the face of normal medical, suggestion at the time. It prescribed for young kids who got polio activation of the muscle, as opposed to the medical experts were saying complete non-movement, like a child should just stop moving and lay in bed, which is the worst thing that a child could really do, really, for them, right? And so Wilson, when he first got hit with the polio, he writes about this in his work, being such a young mind, but suffering from the pains of the spasms that polio brings. It's an extremely painful virus. It starts out as it's the polio virus that turns into a disease, right? And if one isn't killed within the first 3 weeks of getting polio, they're suffering greatly. And Wilson got his real first taste of existential suffering at such a young age that he would sit in bed at night and just contemplate just how terrible the universe could be. How could a God exist that would cause such suffering on me, or people that I love? And for him, it was him and his small body and mind at that time. So I think that left an imprint in Bob, like that. And this is why maybe later the work of H.P. Lovecraft appeals to him, because there's a similar theme. He found in Lovecraft's work these dark, ancient, incomprehensible beings that are so much bigger than puny humans and what we care about. And they're not benevolent. They're not necessarily malevolent. Right? They're not necessarily not on our side. They just don't really care about us, and they'll cause us pain in a heartbeat. That's what Wilson got from H.P. Lovecraft years later. This was sort of imprinted in him at a young age. So, as I said, he received a relative cure of the Sister Kenny method, which involved activation of the muscles, movement, stretching, and what eventually for Wilson, he also took on positive thinking. So he was confronted with very real existential dangers, right? There was nothing to be paranoid about at that age. Like he was in physical threat. And by by really surmounting a mountain, really with the help of his mom, he, as I said, received relative cure from that horrible virus/disease, was able to live most of his life, still suffering spasms here and there, but it wasn't debilitating. But my point is that the fact that he was in touch with this real visceral pain at such a young age, I think put him in touch with that wavelength of what could be perhaps, a frustrating motivation behind thinking conspiratorially at times, which is that there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but I think maybe it's got something to do with that or those people or this group of people or whatever, right? Wilson was in touch with the notion of there's something wrong. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's inside me, right? So that's such a deep lesson. And then, as I said, being able to sort of overcome this through, and he received a real lesson in this notion of activation and have to keep it moving. Common phrase in I guess certain literature is move a muscle, change a thought. Wilson became very aware of that as well. He was confronted with an extreme challenge at a very young age, and he was able to overcome that for the most part. And I think that was also an imprint for his optimism and his ability to stay motivated, to constantly stay present and find an opportunity to make things better. I think as well, like the more, Wilson was able to study psychology of his own mind and then the kind of sociology, he was able to see that, we're all the same for the most part. Humans respond to things very similarly. And that, so when you're faced with such hardship, it's easier to think conspiratorially. It's easier just to be frustrated and to project that out to the world in some ways. And then when you're able to sort of achieve a goal, like it's easier to start believing in the ability to change things yourself, which I think ultimately that's at the heart of optimism, is this idea that like I or we can change something to make this better. And conspiracy theory at the heart of that is like the alarm is going off of like, whoa, we need to change something. But, people are grasping at straws to find out what that is. So I think that experience sort of just imprinted Wilson to be the voice of someone who could express both of these things and leave that unique perspective for people to read in his books, and then they themselves be able to hold these two conflicting notions at the same time. And I think that adds to what becomes his ironic style, as Jesse Walker calls it. Wilson's whole view towards conspiracy theories itself is not just swallow the pill and believe everything. They're litmus tests for your critical thinking skills. Don't just swallow everything everyone says to you. You can't do that about anything. Why would you do that about the biggest grand narrative like stories of all time? You have to apply critical thinking. So there's just a whole lot there. I think Wilson was able to turn a corner and hold those two perspectives constantly in his work, and then also let the reader work things out for themselves too, which is also pretty gifted.
That's actually a really interesting take, and it makes a lot of sense that his optimism was shaped by this alternative approach to polio because the vaccine wasn't available. It makes me wonder, if he had just gotten the polio vaccine, would that have maybe like killed his perspective on optimism and of thinking that you can like overcome things through positive thinking and just moving around and like you said, change a muscle, change a thought. That might not have ever even come into contact with Robert Anton Wilson. We might have gotten a completely different person out of that if it weren't for that early suffering and being forced to figure out a way around it or a way to sort of cope with it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Thomas. Yeah. And also too, the key of being able to, he received the help as well, from his mom. Of course, he was a child, but I think that's a part of the component too, is that overcoming, maybe if there's some conspiracy theories they later turn out to be true. So they're not, but some are grand narrative, like just wild theories that seem to be helping someone emotionally more than anything else and trying to say the truth of the matter, and that which they might be more paranoid. So when you're stuck in a paranoia, it's isolating. But to receive help from another person, I think is a big, it breaks the isolation, and that's a big part of Wilson's life too. He wrote about all these crazy conspiracy theories, but this guy was able to be a part of networks of support for people. And then he himself received networks of support from the vicissitudes of life, like how hard life could be for just a regular person living. And he endured many hardships, and a major part of that getting through it wasn't just himself bootstrapping by himself. I'm a tough stoic. It was, he had an open heart, and he was able to receive help from people. That's a major part of this too. He was able to be part of a mutual network of support and be a recipient of such support as well.
On the conspiracy theory topic too, I've talked to a bunch of people, and I've read some articles where there's almost an ambiguousness about Robert Anton Wilson's role in, say, popularizing the Illuminati or popularizing certain versions of conspiracy through Discordianism and through Fnord and all of, and I guess one of the things that comes up with his sort of being directly involved with Timothy Leary and even writing certain passages with him, there's a question as was he an insider? Was he in on some of this conspiracy? Just like Timothy Leary sometimes get accused that he was just an agent of the CIA. He was just one of the tendrils that made its way into this counterculture. And Robert Anton Wilson very much was also a voice of counterculture. He was editor, I believe, of High Times or Playboy magazine for a while. So he was in the epicenter of this counterculture. What do you think that what were his thoughts on being accused of being part of the conspiracy, that like he was in the Illuminati?
Thomas, great question. I think there's kind of two parts to that question. I'd love to get into both. I'll answer the second part first, which is his thoughts, which he wrote about, of being accused of maybe being Timothy Leary's CIA babysitter.
Right.
That was one of the accusations, right? And that came about in the late 70s, like when Wilson most of his work was now finally being published in the late 70s. And it coincided to when Leary was released from prison in May 1976. The reality is, well, I don't want to, the situation is Wilson and Leary were acquaintances since 1964 when Wilson interviewed Leary for the first time for the Realist magazine in a great article called Leary's Psychological H-Bomb, which is a fantastic read. I talk about it in my book, Chapel Perious, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. It's a great scene in the book. And also they become friends. They're kindred spirits. They're these two wild Irish American free-thinking, rebels, and Bob likes this guy. He's a wild dude, and Leary was a very interesting character, man. He broke out of prison at the age of 50. Okay. he was a Harvard professor turned, prison escapee. I don't know any. Do you know, has Slavoj Žižek ever broken out of prison? I don't think so. I don't know any professor that has ever broken out of prison like Leary did, and that wasn't with the help of the CIA. That was with the help of the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers, And so in terms of Bob's responses to, I guess, accusations at times that he was Leary's CIA babysitter, well, no, was his response, like, quite simply, like, how would he be, but to maybe perhaps speak on why there was such paranoia, it was surrounding Leary. I looked at, Leary, as I said, escaped from prison. He was put in prison for a marijuana charge that gave him 37 years in prison. It was the harshest, like, marijuana charge prison sentence. Like, I don't know.
Must have been some pretty strong marijuana.
Yeah, it's a great point. Very strong strain. And the judge called Leary the most dangerous man in America and locked him away. Leary wasn't having any of that and escaped from prison in 1971. Part of the reason why he was able to escape was because when he worked as a psychologist, he created this thing called the Leary Circumplex, which was a personality test that was hugely popular in institutions like prisons. And so Leary happened to receive, when they were figuring out what prison to put him in, high security or low security, they gave him his own test that he and his team invented, right? So Leary knew how to answer the questions to the test to be put into a very low security prison from which he escaped, right? And
something a CIA person might do.
Yeah, right. Well, sure. That story, did Leary really, what's the word? It's really awesome. Like when you shimmy past on a wire, this is his story. He climbed the pole, he got to the roof, and he shimmied over a wire, to then
like a tightrope walk.
Yeah, but shimmying. Yes. So I forget the term for it. It's you see it in all the awesome, like, army movies. Like, so this is a good point. Could Leary have just been, let right out and said, right this way, sir? Well, where would the CIA be in that? It would be, in the people helping him escape. Was he himself in the CIA and he just had a easy way to get out? Well, it was the CIA that arrested him, according to Wilson and others. Like, Leary was eventually arrested in Afghanistan when he was hanging out with Eldridge Cleaver and his crew in Africa, and then he left and then was bouncing around and ended up in Afghanistan on a connecting flight. And then that's when the CIA arrested him, and according to Wilson, quite illegally, they pretty much kidnapped Leary. They had no jurisdiction to do this. And what was the reason to like kidnap, to arrest just a prison escapee? Like, you know, Leary was probably more like, well, according to my research, which was a lot, Leary seems more like a Julian Assange character who was, you know, and this is not discounting whether the history of LSD is one that's first generation is all CIA. Leary is part of the second generation of kind of LSD researchers who are actually psychologists and not these crazy CIA agents just dosing each other just to see what happens, you know, like, and so Leary became a you know, real scapegoat for, you know, the kind of collapse of the hippie movement. And even Richard Nixon, he was high on Richard Nixon's shit list. This is why Leary was, again, according to Wilson, kidnapped by the CIA all the way in Afghanistan. They spent all this money to do this to Leary. And then, so when they put Leary back in prison, like a whisper campaign began. So immediately when he was put in prison, like literally like immediately before he was even like briefed by the cops much, the New York Times, and you could Google this, you could read these New York Times articles. I don't think they're paywalled right now. There's a series of articles like from 73, 74, basically saying that Leary was arrested. He's going to snitch on everybody in the left, everybody in the underground. He's going to snitch. So, you know, it wasn't uncommon at all. This was a tactic from, you know, agencies like the FBI, CIA, but mostly the FBI because it was domestic. It's called a bad jacket, right? They did it all the time in COINTELPRO. It's to cause confusion and dissent within the leftist underground. And it worked very well when they did it to the Black Panthers and other organizations, when they would send fake letters to the leaders of these organizations to get them to fight and want to kill each other. The FBI was doing that. It's very common knowledge now, you know, COINTELPRO. And so part of those campaigns to separate people's, you know, care for these people who are brave enough to take stances in a repressive society like Leary was, is to disinvest them from their supporters. So that was immediate, when Leary was put in jail the second time, was to float it all through the underground that Leary was a snitch. And then it became, I don't know, where it became that Leary was a part of the CIA. I never really heard it like that. As I said, I heard it like, he had a CIA babysitter, and people accused, like at times, Wilson of being such babysitter. But there was another individual named George Koopman, who was accused of being Leary's sort of intelligence babysitter. And he was he worked at one time with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, those are the fellas to maybe watch, maybe also naval intelligence in these realms, right? Maybe these are the areas to watch, right? It's not just the CIA here, right? So, you know, so it would be interesting, like if Leary, entertaining that thought for a second, like, and this, who knows, man? I mean, Bob gets into this in his work. Like when you have double, triple, quadruple, quintuple agents, they don't always know that so-and-so is undercover and so-and-so is working for who. So you can have one undercover with one agency who has a cover story, spying on another undercover in another agency who also has a cover story. And they're both like watching each other's cover stories, each other's legends, but they're both undercover working for other agencies. Like this is what makes Wilson so brilliant as a writer. Like this is what he's able to get into an Illuminatus trilogy, is showing how fast moving, you know, a deep state world really is. Right. And so I think where it hit the accusation of Wilson in a way of being Leary's CIA babysitter, I think that might've come about because perhaps Leary was so famous, and when he got out of jail, it's like, who's this guy next to him? And it was Bob. They did a number of tours together. You know, Wilson was very pivotal in resurrecting Leary's intellectual career. I have in my book the scene when Leary gets out of prison. Him and his then wife, Joanne, are staying in the Pecos Wilderness in New Mexico. They're, you know, placed there before getting put into whatever. It was still probation or something, right? This was around May 1976. Joanne talks about how Leary was on the phone constantly with Wilson. And what they were doing was Wilson was making moves to get him and Leary's book that they collaborated on, the periodic table of energy, which later basically becomes like the blueprint for things in Prometheus Rising. In that book, they discuss basically the 8th Circuit model of intelligence. And, really they would just became kindred spirits and friends, according to how Wilson wrote it, right? But I think there were a number of people who weren't aware of who Bob was. And some of them, I guess the whisper campaign then in the hippie underground at the time then was Leary's name was sullied. It was already dragged through the dirt before he was released from prison. So he already had, as I say, perhaps this bad jacket on him. There was, and that's not for out of nowhere, right? He did get into some sort of beef, if you will, with one of his lawyers, Leary did during his trials. And this was a man named Michael Kennedy, who was like a huge kick-ass, civil rights lawyer. But he also, I guess, Leary accused him of being kind of like the spokesman for the Weather Underground, which the Weather Underground at the time, I think might have been considered a domestic terrorist group. There were a bunch of college students that turned into an underground revolutionary movement who did, some wild things in America, one of which was helping Leary break out of prison and sending him to Africa. And that came about because Leary had like 5 wives or something during his life. So when he was in prison, he had another wife, this woman named Rosemary. And she was the one that it said who had the connections with all these underground people in, all these scenes. So that's the first part. Wilson's response was to have a hearty laugh because, Bob was, according to him, not in the CIA. And he thought it was funny that there was these waves of paranoia that shifted through the scene. I mean, the first generation of really dealing with heavy paranoia was, that 60s, 70s kind of hippie generation, and Bob was one of those people who was seeking to make sense of why are so many people paranoid at times, and I mean, when it came to the first part of your question, which was could Bob have been in the CIA or something like that,
right? Well, and to qualify that a little bit based on everything you just mentioned, sometimes the way that I understand this particular skepticism of Robert Anton Wilson and conflated with Timothy Leary, that connection between the two, but it's that the counterculture movement had been co-opted by intelligence. And I guess CIA is easy to throw a blanket term. And in my mind, that kind of includes naval intelligence, it includes OSS, includes CIA, includes all of like the William Donovan, it includes all of these different things, Camp X, and all these other like LSD adjacent sort of pioneers, but that Robert Anton Wilson, to a lot of people, also represented a degeneracy in that he worked with Playboy magazine, that he was open to talking with all these horrible druggies and drug addicts and counterculture people, and that who else better if you want to infiltrate counterculture than to get Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary into the fold. And I guess to an extra qualifier here, that being an asset doesn't necessarily mean being an agent. It just means that you are somehow useful, maybe even unwittingly to you, in the same way that you mentioned the CIA was this original sort of way, this first wave of LSD of let's just throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And let's just see what happens. That you can extrapolate that same mentality to now people and the counterculture movement. Let's see what happens if we get Robert Anton Wilson in the fold and Timothy Leary. Let's see what happens if we arrest them and let him break out and then arrest them again, just to elevate his status as almost a folk hero, but one that we have, if not control over, but that we've got eyes on him. We know what he's up to, what he's writing, all the things that he's doing, so we can sort of trace all the effects of what this Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson experiment are doing. And to tack on the other thing too that I've seen come up is that we might not even know about the Bavarian Illuminati in the same capacity if it weren't for this Illuminatus trilogy bringing it back into the public sphere in a way. And you're probably way more of an expert on Robert Anton Wilson's take on this, but I remember reading at some point his own words where it was like he thought it would just be funny to blame this antiquated 200-year-old organization as perhaps the source of all sorts of modern day like issues that were going on. Again, maybe not troll might be a loaded word, but as like an instigator or just as this like satirical writer, wouldn't it be funny if we got people to focus their paranoia on this 2-century-old group of Bavarians, and that this combination of factors, being adjacent to counterculture, working at what a lot of fundamentalists would consider like the degeneration of culture through Playboy magazine, and just his acceptance of psychedelics, that all those combined marks him as like an agent of chaos, like a useful agent of chaos.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, this is great. Sure. I mean, it's interesting that, of course, when you are writing a biography about a writer who, went there, he opened the doors of paranoia. I mean, when you enter the realm of paranoia, it's you're entering Chapel Perilous. Everything is waiting for you with slavering jaws in Chapel Perilous, writes Wilson. And he, when you write about these things, eventually it's not that unusual to think that you then will start getting accused of being an agent in this and or a mis or disinformation agent, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I hear what you're saying, right? Like, so CIA is just sort of like a metaphor for intelligence agency, if you will, right? Different intelligence agencies. And there is, right, yeah, there's some precedent to these sort of things where, let's just take the CIA, for example, right? There's a book called The Cultural Cold War, I believe. And this book, also this writer named Carl Bernstein, who was, Woodward and Bernstein, the guys that exposed the Watergate conspiracy, from Richard Nixon and his boys. And Carl Bernstein once put out I think it was a Rolling Stone article in the 70s or 80s that talked about how infiltrated mainstream journalists and journalism was with CIA agents, right? So, that's not a far leap. The CIA was started, it's like an Ivy League club, out of Yale and stuff like that. So these are hoity-toities, right? Like intellectual, English majors like James Jesus Angleton loved modernist poetry and wrote letters to Ezra Pound and E.E. Cummings and stuff. So, these are well-read people, I suppose. So it's not a far leap to think that maybe like, oh, wow, the Anderson Cooper was a major news person trained at the CIA before he got his break at CNN. That's interesting. What's that about? Anderson Cooper from the famous Vanderbilt empire, so Carl Bernstein in this article many years earlier basically talks about this, and how many CIA agents were, how deep the CIA might be in American journalism. So perhaps then are there writers that were assets, or on the spectrum? Were there writers that were CIA agents? I think William F. Buckley might have been a CIA agent. I know there's a couple William Buckleys, but if it's the one I'm thinking of, the one who was a big conservative, who actually was part of the group that said we don't let them amanatize the eschaton. This Catholic conservatism works very well with the CIA. Actually, the CIA was full of Catholic conservatives. James Jesus Angleton was another one. And William F. Buckley was literally like a writer making money as a writer, but also was a CIA agent. Didn't let anyone really know it, but he was that. but it did come out, right? So now, does the CIA invest in far out sci-fi writers / philosophers who choose to leave their job at Playboy after creating what he thinks is, what is a masterpiece, and then spends the next 5 or 6 years in utter poverty and destitution? I mean, hey, who knows? That could be a deep agent. That's deep cover, man. That's, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, there are some. They're usually like the soldiers of fortune guys that, you know, they are used literally as CIA adjacent contractors who go into third world villages and rape, pillage, and kill. Those fellas, like some of them may be used in trying to kill Fidel Castro and whatnot. Those guys, a couple of them might have lived kind of close to the bone, working menial jobs, and maybe that was part of their cover, you know, but maybe they had an account here and there to get them through the hard times. I don't know. Timothy Leary once said, when he was accused of being in the CIA or being used as the CIA, was like, I mean, they didn't pay me enough then, right? And this, again, also, that doesn't discount much either. I mean, paranoia can find, you could find a needle in a haystack from anyone. You could find any reason for anyone to maybe be part of this preconceived idea that one may have, right? And again, I thought of this a lot. Like, what could Wilson have been an agent of some kind? And yes, let's discount the CIA. Let's get into naval intelligence. Right?
And I even interject an unwitting asset. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone was like, hey, do you want to join the CIA? Sign up here that says you agree. It could almost just be that you happen to be in circles that have already been infiltrated, and now you're on the radar, and it's like, hey, let's just tail this Robert Anton Wilson guy. Let's tail this Timothy Leary guy, because wherever he goes, he carries a great amount of influence. And if we could just steer it, or if we could just analyze what they're doing and then bring that back to Langley or wherever the hell they bring the information back to. I've heard the same sort of claims leveraged against, say, like William S. Burroughs, that he had such deep insight into what would have been classified sort of research about, you know, insulin shock therapy that was kind of outside of the purview that he normally would have had as just like a writer or a poet. But yet these like deep connections and references to very real operations kind of show up in his quote unquote fictional works. And I think that it's almost in the same bucket. Like, was he getting a paycheck from the CIA? Maybe not, but he might have had a friend or some sort of influences that were feeding him information, and to him it's just like, wow, what a great idea for a character in a book that I'm writing in Naked Lunch or something. Meanwhile, that guy could have been an agent, or that guy could have been an ad. It's hard to tell, because it's not like they kept the records that they intentionally then released 50 years later, right?
Yeah, I mean, but it is very interesting with this information that we have now, even just Wikipedia and the internet, to do a kind of revisionist take on the past, because now we have more information than before. And I mean, it is interesting that, San Miguel Allende, which is a place in Mexico that became a big place for artist colonies, expatriate American artist colonies, which Wilson went to with his family after leaving Playboy. Arlen's sister was living there, so they didn't just they stayed organically with Arlen's sister. But I mean, and a ton of artists have like been to San Miguel Allende. They live there, whatever, whatnot. It's a really cool kind of like history place. However, one of the persons involved in kind of creating San Miguel Allende as an artist colony for expatriates was someone who was in the OSS during World War II. So, I mean, this idea of earmarking intellectuals and artists and either working with them, as like William F. Buckley, like, you know, you go through the program. Again, Anderson Cooper went to the CIA program. You could Google that, you know, and then he just decided to become a journalist and become, you know, have a clear path to the top. Now,
likewise, Tucker Carlson mentioned that he tried to get in, but then wasn't accepted or ended up like not joining the same program that Anderson Cooper was in.
Yeah, Tucker had, whatever, yeah, they were both I mean, again, it's journalists, right? Like of course, you want, they could be used as, one could be a true investigative journalist, or one could be a propaganda puppet, right? And viewers or readers can't really know at first. They have to analyze your work and whatnot, and really look and see and study. I mean, I spent 8 years really like zeroing in on Wilson's life and asking. I mean, this was definitely an interesting path. I mean, I sent to cut to the chase there about Wilson and the CIA. I mean, I wasn't able to reach out to other intelligence agencies. I mean, I sent 2 letters, information requests, one to the FBI and one to the CIA. And now this is a funny thing, right? I mean, I was living at that time in Hawaii, in like on Oahu, the one tiny section that you wouldn't ever think was the hood, but it was kind of the hood because that's where artists get placed, right? And I went to the post office one day, right, surrounded by a bunch of sort of local Hawaiians who, there is a bit of a skeptical look at mainlanders, and then maybe, a lighter shade of mainlander at times.
Hoolies, right?
Yeah, haole. You could be quickly seen as like a haole, which is sort of just kind of like part of the settler invaders, right? The people who basically took their land from them. And so you're seen with suspicion. You're already placed as a type of other, right? And so, I went into the post office this one day after, requesting this information about Robert Anton Wilson. And I have right there, this person handing me the letter is looking at me because from the CIA, to me, right? And so they could think, is this guy in the CIA? Which is kind of funny. And so, I mean, Wilson, obviously this was not lost on him. He said that, this just happens, right? Like, in that letter, I received what's called the GLOMAR response, GLORMAR response. And this is kind of like a standard response that these intelligence agencies now give. And it's actually, they were sued to stop giving this response because it's not enough information. And actually they leave it as sort of ambiguous, which, again, keeps the flame burning for one's own pay if you want, right? And they thought they were funny too, the CIA, when they first the GLOMAR response, I don't quite remember it offhand, but it's something like we may or may not have information on the person that you're looking for. This person may or may not have been involved in our shit or not, but we can't tell you.
Right, we can neither confirm nor deny sort of response.
That's it. Thank you. Yes, we can neither confirm nor deny. So, the CIA's first tweet on Twitter before Musk took over was like, we can neither confirm nor deny that this is a tweet from the CIA. Like, har, 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 bro. Very funny. And like, so, there were people, like I said, James Jesus Angleton, who were friends with, like, there were people who were like publishers and whatnot who would be like maybe adjacent or agents or used by the CIA here and there. Wilson as a useful idiot, which is, that term of being used by an agency without knowing it. It's funny, he commented on that in one of his last interviews in 2001 in an interview series called Robert Anton Wilson Explains Everything, parentheses, or Old Bob Exposes His Ignorance. And that was that, perhaps maybe he was used as a useful idiot at one time or other. He didn't specify in what way. I think it's because he was writing about these things. And also, he was aware. Wilson was aware that there were agents about, when he was working at Playboy, well, I'll get into that maybe later. Like he was very aware of agents and whatnot. He had also another thing. This was the real jewel that's in my book. Is Wilson had this thing called a Red Squad file, And this was a file on him by a branch of the Chicago Police Department in the late 1960s. New York City had a branch as well, and maybe other cities as well. Maybe Los
It's called
Angeles.
the Red Squad.
This was called the Red Squad in Chicago, and the Red Squad file. The Red Squad was set up to basically search out communists, subversives, anarchists, feminists, anyone that had the gall to actually be against the Vietnam War and who protested in the street against the pointless killing of Vietnamese women and children and American soldiers dying for what reason. The Americans were told one reason why they were fighting, but some of them saw through that this is about something else. This isn't about fighting communism per se. This is some other shit that's going on, and they protested.
It's like an extension of McCarthyism in a way.
It was extreme. It was and it was pre-McCarthyite. Like the Red Squad. If I'm correct, there was kind of two generations of it. Like the first sort of generation was it came up as a response to the first Red Scare that happened in America after the 1917 Russian Revolution, when America got scared, and I mean maybe they should have, that these crazy Bolsheviks wanted worldwide a communist revolution, right? And the workers unite, workers of the world unite. Well, American industrialists weren't having that. In 1917, they had a whole other way of running their economy. So there was paranoia. Like they didn't want agents of Russia coming in and destroying the moral fiber of America. This is where in 1917, 1920s. This is where the first Red Squad was organized in Russia, not Russia, in Chicago. And so one of their targets was feminists at that time. Like there's even the guy who invented like the Red Squad. He says all this is verifiable online, right? From newspapers. I mean, this guy who created the first Red Squad, like had a lot of really like harsh opinions of women in general. It's kind of shocking, And then so post McCarthy, right? Like, the Cold War is all about America fighting communism. I mean, the Korean War that occurs in the early 1950s is the first war of the Cold War. It's fighting the communists, right? Korea gets split between the Northern Korean commies and then the South Korean free people, because America's there introducing baseball and whatnot, And so fast forward to the 60s, like J. Edgar Hoover is at the helm of the FBI. This guy is a paranoid, cross-dressing, like maniac. This guy is a strange dude. And as Nixon said about J. Edgar Hoover with envy, Hoover had a file on everyone. Hoover was this guy. He was this ultimate paranoid dude, just like James Jesus Angleton at the CIA. These guys are putting recording devices in everything, trying to record, get dirt on everyone. Meanwhile, Hoover likes nothing against it at all, man. Just why are your policies against it? Hoover was a cross-dresser. Hoover loved putting on makeup and high heels and a nice fancy dress. Like
he was going undercover.
He was going undercover. He was undercover. He was definitely he was going way undercover with Roy Cohn, who is the mentor to President Trump. Roy Cohn also was going undercover a lot too. He was part of that lace mafia or whatever.
Yeah, the famous quote was that Roy Cohn isn't gay; he just likes to have sex with men.
Yeah, they're gay.
Right.
I just remember Al Pacino playing Roy Cohn in a movie or something, and him saying, he's like, "I'm not gay, they're gay."
Right.
But kind of digressing here, but to show the kind of fertile ground that already existed in America in terms of like an institutional paranoia, right? Like perhaps there were other ways that the American establishment could have responded and reacted to this notion of, I'm sure there were agents of Bolshevik agents that wanted to agitate working people to overthrow their capitalist masters and form a union of workers and whatnot, and there were also probably, it's not like Stalin comes after Lenin, and then Stalin is an absolute madman. So, it's a complicated thing, right? Like, but America's kind of institutional response was like overkill, killing a fly with a sledgehammer. This is not uncommon. And this historically happens by the powers that be. Instead of choosing the logical way to fix shit, they just seek to kill a fly with a sledgehammer. The NSA did it many, many years later when they instituted their mass spying program on all Americans during the Bush administration. They could have done a simpler, easier program that was available, yet they chose to do a more expensive spying program that spied on every single American almost. Like, that's documented. This writer named, former NSA guy named Thomas Drake talks about that. But so just saying, like, this is the world that exists there and perhaps still exists, right? Like, and where this response is to just create departments that are they legal? Are they questionably legal? So the Red Squad was a department within the Chicago Police Department that they were, in constant contact with the FBI, and their main focus. So there was sort of like perhaps a national conversation, because the FBI is very organized nationally. That's the whole point, right? So they could communicate perhaps from agents in Chicago to New York. And this is what they did. This is to the home office, Hoover takes a look, whatever. And so fast forwarding to Wilson and Arlen, Bob and his wife Arlen being spied on by the Chicago Red Squad in the late 60s, all the kind of like activist activity that they were doing, which was kind of traditionally leftist anarchist stuff at the time. Arlen was involved in, women against the Vietnam War and whatnot. And again, because she was a feminist who was against the war, that got a major target on her back. It's not hard to see, like, the institutions, they don't like women speaking up, right? And so Bob's involvement with groups that he was involved in got him attention. But what was interesting, like, speaking of Playboy, he never really wrote about this, Wilson. I learned about this story that I'm about to tell because he told this at a talk, right before he talked, even right before the talk, right before someone pressed record on the talk. This was in a talk in San Francisco. I think it was like December 4th, 2001. I saw him speak, and he said right before the talk, he says, "You guys want to know how I became a paranoid?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, what the fuck?" And I had just eaten like a weed cookie, so I was getting really high, And then here's Bob talking about paranoia, and I'm like, "Oh shit!" And he tells a story, and I put it in my book, Chapel Perilous, about how one day he's working at Playboy. A mysterious Playboy executive comes into his office, an executive who has an office on the floor with all the writers and not with the other executives, an executive who Bob never sees going to meetings, but he sees this guy taking celebrities out to the Playboy Club. He's a schmoozer type of executive. He comes into the office and sits down and immediately tells Bob, he says, "You're in the Red Squad files. You're being surveilled by the Red Squad." And this was a very sort of like scary thing to think about. And Bob was like, "What do you mean? Why am I on the Red Squad files?" And the guy said to him, "You're running guns for the Black Panthers." And Bob was like, "What? I'm not running guns for the Black Panthers. What are you talking about?" And the executive says to him, "Well, I have a guy who is a confidential informant for the cops, but he is also an informant to me. So he heard another informant through the wire, or it even could have been him, tell the cops this, that you're running guns for the fucking Black Panthers." And Wilson he's like, no. He's like, "I help with their free breakfast program. I help with their lunch program." And at the time, Wilson was hanging out with some Black Panthers. And the executive was like, "Okay, I believe you. He's like, "Don't get any ideas. Don't do that stuff. But I'll tell you, I'll make sure that your name does not come up in these files while you're working here." And
working here.
at Playboy, yep. And sure enough, and this was because, again, this guy, who was this mysterious guy? He even had his own little spy in the criminal world, his own little spy that was a confidential informant, right, as well. So this guy was informing to the police, but then also giving information to this executive, right? And so, sure enough, when I accessed the files, many, many years later, and as far as I know, Wilson never even knew about these files, never even was able to access them. From the time that Wilson, Bob, and Arlen were in Chicago from 1966 to 1971, Arlen's name pops up every single year, right? Wilson's name pops up once at the very beginning and then never again, even though he was going to a lot of protests. And his name pops up only one more time, but this was after he'd already left Playboy, when Arlen and he went back to Chicago from Mexico to sign a contract for some book deals. And they were at a protest, a May Day protest for the Haymarket, the Haymarket Affair remembrance on May 1st, 1972. And I have a long file on that. Wilson was definitely watched at that. And Wilson was no longer at Playboy, which is very interesting. Is Playboy a part of the degeneration of the Western society? Boobies. I think bombs are more destructive than boobs. I think.
Well, let me tack on to this particular claim, because I guess, boobies versus bombs, but also some of the unsubstantiated maybe, but ideas that Hugh Hefner and the origins of Playboy was really just another sort of blackmail operation, that they would get celebrities or high-ranking anyone into these parties and put them in compromising situations, and just like a J. Edgar Hoover, where everything is microphone, everything is being recorded, in the secret passages underneath the Playboy mansion out to everyone else's houses, that it wasn't just about boobies, but it was about blackmail more so than anything else, like an OG Epstein or an OG Diddy or something.
Sure. I mean, I guess where I would go next with that is, where are the claims, right? Where are the stories? It's been many, many years since then, many opportunities for people to write exposés about Hugh Hefner. He's been dead for years now. Epstein, that story came out before he even died. Diddy, the story.
Epstein being a great example. Where are the arrests and the names in the black book? And it's, I guess, the conspiratorial explanation of this is that the black book just changed hands, and whoever owns that black book, whoever can destroy American dynasties just by saying, hey, look, here's the proof, that's where the power's at. So revealing that to the public gets rid of all the power that it's concentrated in this little spot. So if Hugh Hefner did have some sort of record, again, this is conspiracy speculation. But
I love it.
If you did have the receipts, having the receipts is far more powerful than showing them to everyone. The second you show them to everyone, there goes all of your power. You don't have any bargaining chips left.
Oh, yeah. And then that's when you enter the realm of poker, because you're not showing your hand to people then. So what are you doing? You could be bluffing as well.
Right.
We get into this realm now. We're way beyond the realm of, if we bring a either or mindset, as Wilson would call an Aristotelian either or mindset.
The maybe logic, right?
Yeah. One needs maybe logic to not go crazy in this realm. There are plenty of crazy, let's just stay on the topic, CIA agents. There was even that interesting TV show, Homeland, that Claire Danes' character, she's schizophrenic and she's a CIA agent, which kind of makes a lot of sense, because there's been a lot of stuff put out, especially by a writer today, and whose name escapes me. I think he wrote this book, I don't know, The Devil's Play Chessboard or something like that, which he writes about James Jesus Angleton, and this was already known. I write about it in my book. Wilson wrote about it as well. James Jesus Angleton was like a Philip K. Dick character. His paranoia was off the Richter scale. This guy was so paranoid, that he thought that the Russian mole, because his high time was during the Cold War, was deep in the CIA. So he was constantly seeking to look for these Russian moles in the CIA. At one point, I don't know. I don't want to mix metaphors, but it wouldn't surprise me if he even started wondering if he himself was the mole without even knowing it too.
I love that.
Scanner Darkly, but but I have to, this is just the way my mind would work too. If such a speculative thought came up, right? It's like, well, on the topic of Epstein's Black Book, I do believe that this writer Nick Bryant, who talks a lot about this, many years ago.
Scandal is one of his books.
Yeah, that's a very disturbing and very interesting read. And he many years ago, before Epstein even died, no, it was right after Epstein died, but before it became a huge story, I believe he published the Black Book. He had the Black Book published in, I don't know if it was Vanity Fair or something like that. He told me this. I had a conversation with him about this, and then I found it. He said, he's like, I saw the Black Book, right? And he said he saw George Bush's George Bush, the first president's name all up in that ish. Isn't it funny how his name hasn't really come up, right, in any of these Epstein things? And who was George Bush, the senior? Oh, he just happened to be the head of the CIA, who then became the president of the United States, who after, Reagan was, almost assassinated by Hinckley, who the Hinckley family was friends with the Bush family, right? So it is interesting. This guy, Russ Baker, wrote a book about really going in on, what's it called? The Bush Family Dynasty or something like that. That might not be the name, but it goes in on the Bush family and really explores how—
I think it was the unauthorized biography of Bush or something.
Do I have the book around here? Oh, here it is. Yeah. Family of Secrets.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Russ Baker. This guy, his whole target is George Bush Sr. in this, and he builds a very, strong argument for the fact that, George Bush Sr. is a deep state agent for many years, even possibly present at Dealey Plaza that day that JFK was killed. What? Why was George Bush Sr. there? This guy was the head of the CIA, who then became fucking president. I mean, that was in 1988, right? So we're going deep here in deep state manipulations of the public mind, if you will. And, circling back then too, as well, because this is a nice thing to keep returning to. Well, then also too, though, with the allegations then, or claims and allegations against Hugh Hefner having these sex parties where, things were being recorded and whatnot. I mean, I counter, where are the receipts, man? Show me those receipts, because there are at least stories, right? There were never even any stories that have come out about, Hugh Hefner doing this stuff, really. Just as if things can always change, but there's been really never any stories. Timothy Leary never got Me Too'd retrospectively, right? Like, and this guy married like 5 women. Like, was he a serial polygamist, right? Or was he an honest guy who was able to communicate with women and somewhere in between or whatever? There's a biography about Tim Leary that's very unkind to him. I guess that was kind of a conspiracy theory against Leary. Or was it telling the truth? You have to read the book and think about it for yourself. And Wilson himself, again, like, say, linking up with, well, I'll say it like this. I put in the book, he was headhunted to join Playboy in 1966, meaning the editor, who was Hugh Hefner's right-hand man, this guy named A.C. Spektorsky, who was a writer and an editor of great heft at the time, well respected in the industry. He sought Wilson out to write for Playboy. They wanted to get some fresh blood in there, and it's a nice sort of ambiguous story as to there's 2 origin stories as to why Spektorsky reached out to Wilson. Paul Krasner tells one and Wilson tells another. According to Paul Krasner, Spektorsky saw an article Wilson wrote for Krasner's pioneering magazine, The Realist, and it was called like Hugh Hefner is a Virgin. And and this is Bob going in on Hugh Hefner, basically equating him to like Elon Musk level of pretentious stupidity, right? Someone who should have very little say or weight or opinion in anything political anywhere, right? Like Bob was saying this about Hugh Hefner. He was like, just keep putting out pictures of boobies, bro. Don't get involved in talking about political economy and culture and everything like that. And I mean, it's interesting because in that article, Bob's even taken the position that, you know, this is slightly maybe, what are you doing here at Playboy? Are you pro sexual revolution, or are you continuing the exploitation of women and men, right? Which is it's so interesting. It's a fiery takedown, right?
Well, that's another good either or, maybe logic sort of situation, right? Both.
Yeah, because both, in the sense that Wilson later writes another article that he said was the reason why he got hired, because Paul Krasner said Spektorsky read this article, or Hugh Hefner read it and was like, let's get this guy, right, writing for us. He roasted us or something, which is interesting. Like, maybe the way into these big places is to kick these people in the nuts, you know, like just insult them. Like Dee Reynolds outside the nightclub in Always Sunny, when Dennis tells her to insult the doorman, that's how they get in the club. Sure,
it's like the negging technique.
Right. Yes. You just punch up, guys. Don't punch down. Punch up. The article that Wilson said that got him the job is a really great article, and it's I think it's called "Confessions of a Schlockmeister," and that was also published in The Realist a few years after the Hugh Hefner is a Virgin article. And that's Wilson telling the story so well as he does about his time working for Playboy knockoffs, right? Run by this, publisher of ill repute, if you will, but a legend of pulp, this guy named Myron Foss, who had he put out a ton of magazines, pulp magazines of different genres. So detective magazines, all these nudie magazines, which were all ripoffs of Playboy. That's what Myron Foss did. There was nothing original. It was just rip off the formula, let's put it out. And it was schlock, right? That was old school schlock. And Wilson and Arlen might have worked there too, writing like romance schlock. But Wilson found it kind of liberating for his imagination in a way. Like, he wrote for one of the magazines that had gone to the paranormal and UFOs. He had like a UFO column in that one of these Myron Foss schlock magazines. I'll set it up in the sense that Wilson was hired by Myron Foss around 1965 when he and his family were living back on the East Coast. And he worked for Myron Foss for a number of months, not sure if it was a full year or not. And he got the job because he answered an ad in the back of maybe the Village Voice or some other newspaper. And he knew that there was something up when he was at the office or something. And I forget what it was, but I have it in the book. I have it in my book about it. He's like, you're going to be working 5 different magazines or something. And then that's when he figured like, oh, this is like a schlock factory. Okay, now I know what we're doing here. But he talks about, he wrote for art magazines like Jaguar, where he was able to, bring in some intellectual discussion. So he interviewed like William S. Burroughs in 1965 for Jaguar. He would seek to, as he said, he at one time provided the captions to these pictures, right? So today there's, webcams where the people engaging in the sex work are speaking and talking or whatever, right? But at the time, the magazines, they had obviously these captions. So, he would have these, bimbos or whatever, talking about like beatniks and, writers and stuff like that. So this was Wilson's way of like throwing a cog in the machine in a way, adding some intellectual discussion to, the arousal of your lower chakras. Wilson already is doing something very interesting. He's asking you to don't just spooge it out, bro. Pull it up. Think, use your brain. You know what I mean? Like, this is Wilson is the label of a trickster, because basically he does what great artists are supposed to do, right? And it's the old axiom of never judge a book by its cover. Like, you think you may know like what this person is saying or doing just on an initial interaction with it. But as we all know, that's never enough. An initial interaction is never enough to fully know what's going on with something. And so many great artists they do that. They're like, oh, you think it's like this, but then when you really start reading or looking, wow, it's really like this. So Wilson, you think he's just a kooky conspiracy theorist guy, but really when you start reading, he's like a phenomenologist of high intellectual abilities. But he's also a stoner intellectual, and he does contradict himself in his books sometimes as well. But sort of getting off track here, but bringing it back in to Wilson gets hired anyway, by Spektorsky. This article he ends up writing, Confessions of a Schlockmeister, I think, is so funny. It's so great. And all these articles at The Realists are available online at the Realist Archive. It's a really great website. You could read all this stuff there. And he ends up, I guess, Myron Foss asks him to edit, this magazine. It's supposed to be a big break. And the guy says to him, he's like, look, don't make it too egghead and don't make it too like lascivious or something like that. So he tries to do that, but he gets fired because it's too egghead or whatever, and Wilson knows he's getting fired and he does it. And then he writes this great article about it. And possibly A.C. Spektorsky reads this article and is like, wow, this guy is a brilliant writer. And he also has experience in editorial in this sort of line of work. So, and Bob was also an editor as well in previous magazines and journals. So Playboy was a natural career step. It was also one of the most successful magazines at the time. That's not to say, I also have it in my book as well. I put this a lot in the book. One thing I'm trying to square, I guess, is there are great writers, artists, things, institutions. They've done great things for humanity. And then that same writer, artist, person, institution could be have a real dark, horrible side to them. And this current age is because of all this information and communication technology. I think we're able to see the darkness shadow of people quicker than ever before. And so we're faced with this confrontation of how do you square this, the whole totality of the human psyche, the darkness and the light. And Wilson was never afraid to go to the dark places, but his mind was illuminating and he shined a light. And that's what he did. He's a beacon of Chapel Perilous. Chapel Perilous is a way station that you may find yourself in along your path to whatever you may call it, the metaphor you choose, but self-actualization of the highest regard, really feeling why you're alive and what the whole point of this is for you individually. That's your path to the Holy Grail. And you could get taken off and get trapped in the Chapel Perilous and spend your whole life there. And if we're getting really dynamic and cosmological with it, spend many lives stuck there. And so Wilson is one of those brave, hanging with the metaphor here, brave knights who stand still in the temple, shining a light and presenting a map that could help you escape. Because the way I see it right now, collectively, the world is in Chapel Perilous. I see more individuals stuck in their own type of Chapel Perilous than ever before. People are stuck in this crazy state of mind, and it's a wild time that we're living in. And I think the way that Wilson walked through his own Chapel Perilous and was able to take careful notes and maps, this is why people who are not just Wilson fans should read this book, because you'll see very clearly a map that this person utilized who chose to live a life by the accord of their own, true will. This guy chose to be an artist. That's not an easy path to be in America at all. You know what I mean? And so an artist is supposed to reflect mankind, womankind onto themselves. This is the role of a true artist, is to show a mirror and reflection. So Wilson did that throughout his whole career. He's an extremely important artist in that regard. And him being a beacon of shining light in the Chapel Perilous, his work is valuable, I think, in helping people who might be trapped in paranoid states of mind, at least learn about metanoia. It's a spectrum, right? There's paranoia, which is this idea that everything is connected, but it's all in a conspiracy to just take you down. Now, Wow. What secrets are we holding where we're being that targeted and all that money is being spent specifically on us to have a whole cadre of gang stalkers following us around all day, like bumping into us at the supermarket or, parking in front of a parking spot too long. These gang stalkers are really bad. You know what I mean? Like, if we all go around walking, think that we're all being gang stalked, like that'll lead to a very weird and interesting society. And I think Wilson saw that, as did Philip K. Dick, but Wilson's whole take on it was, we're not there yet. We don't have to go there. And there's a much better way to live. And there's so much potential. And I really made it a point to put it in my book that like Wilson is a voice of like nuclear fusion, if I'm to choose a metaphor, right? Wilson nuclear fusion is this, we just achieved it in December 2002. Humanity just achieved something that could bring more energy and power. It would be a whole new stage of human evolution once humanity is able to fully implement nuclear fusion. And if we're able to transcend these stupid states of mind, these bigoted states of mind that say, well, you're Chinese, or you're Russian, you're Ukrainian, you're Palestinian, you're Israeli, fuck you, you're over there, I'm over here. I think this is like a last minute bug out that people are going through. It's like an acid trip. It's like a heavy ayahuasca trip. Like you're confronted with the paranoia first. You're confronted with everything crazy first. And if you're able to maintain and breathe through it and get through it, you don't even need to do acid and ayahuasca for this. Just study the hero's journey, if you will, the heroine's journey. If you could get through it and not lose your shit and not destroy everyone and have someone destroy you, like you get to the other side, and the other side is joy. And that's something that Wilson had a lot of, and he was able to access.
Well, and I would almost suggest too that Prometheus Rising is an example of that, of like completely switching your mindset and opening it up to new kind of perspectives. And to lead that into a question, I'm curious, what do you think, for someone unfamiliar with Robert Anton Wilson, what is the definitive Robert Anton Wilson book or article? Or if like, you're on death's door, you only got time to read one more book before you die, and you're like, I just want to know what Robert Anton Wilson was about. What would you be able to pinpoint one particular?
Sure, Thomas. Yeah, I think maybe you might have said it right there. I mean, maybe it's Prometheus Rising. Ask Me Tomorrow, and maybe it's Illuminatus Trilogy. And maybe it's Cosmic Trigger. But I think, for the purposes of like wanting to get a real understanding of what his mission was, if you will, right? His intellectual desires, and Prometheus Rising, like you said, it ends quite joyfully, the book, and that's his intention. Like Wilson was a huge fan of Beethoven. He loved classical music. He understood the structures from the hero's journey to the hero's journey of a Beethoven song, crescendo, decrescendo, the rising, explosive, joyous moments. I mean, he's tapped in, man. There's something that he understands, and it's communicated in that book. In that book, he's talking about the 8th Circuit model of intelligence, which pretty much is him and Leary. He gets very much associated with this. Makes sense that's him and Leary's sort of scientific metaphor for individual and collective human evolution and development, which is a quite optimistic model. We could get into, how true every little circuit metaphor is, but overall, it's a very positive and optimistic metaphor for viewing life, And so within Prometheus Rising, Wilson goes through these 8th Circuit model of intelligences, which is the way that what he contrasts his and Leary's work with are very contemporary intellectual thinkers. Like Wilson is not referencing, just Alice Bailey and Melchizedek, whatever, Ramtha. Wilson's not channeling his books are not full of channeled, just kind of screeds. He's doing what now a ton of academics are doing who study the Western esoteric tradition in universities across the world. Wilson was an intellectual, right? So when you read Prometheus Rising, you're getting this synthesis, another one of his great gifts, of like work from Gurdjieff to Carl Jung but then Sigmund Freud to even post-Freudians like Erich Fromm perhaps, or Wilhelm Reich. Then he's introducing James Joyce into the mix. I mean, and then quantum entanglement. It's pretty much all there, like within that book, Prometheus Rising. And then he offers those exercises to do after every chapter.
That's what stands out the most to me in the Prometheus Rising, is that he'll get into very like high order magic, esoteric kind of things that you might have come across before. But then he tells you, now go out into the real world, and here's how you determine for yourself. Like one of the low hanging fruit examples of this is there's one chapter inside Prometheus Rising where the whole premise is to find money, that everywhere you look now, you're going to stare at the ground and you're going to imagine yourself just finding a quarter on the ground. And at first you're just doing it mentally. You're just like imagining that you're finding quarters. And then he sort of has this premise that at a certain point you will find an actual quarter. And now the question is left up to you as the reader and the practitioner. Did you manifest that quarter, or did you just make it so that you were hyper aware of the quarter being there? And I guess in that maybe logic space, it's like, is there a difference between those two things?
Oh man, great example, Thomas. Yeah. And so fun to think about when doing that exercise and thinking back later that day to ask that question, right? Like, because I feel like, finding change on the street, you don't think much about it. You're like, oh, a quarter, nice, cool. But then when Wilson asks you to think about it like this, I think that it's a great exercise, and this is one of his skills too, because of putting attention to our own power of perception. And this is where it infuses his love of and insights gained from Buddhist meditation and general semantics. General semantics is a school of thought that was invented by this guy named Alfred Korzybski after he published this huge book called Science and Sanity, which essentially comes down to what we would call now today like a process philosophy. Things are always moving. You can't say anything is essentially this or that. Doing so gets you caught in kind of mental traps and in a world that doesn't really exist. Wilson is constantly seeking, and this is why he's a great phenomenologist, to draw people's awareness to right here, right now. We could get lost in the sauce. We could mistake, and he gets this from general semantics, the map for the territory, meaning we have an amazing capacity as human beings and ability. This is what perhaps makes us stand out from other animals, is that we can create imaginary realms in our head and then project that out into the world and literally see what's going on in our head.
Is this what he called a reality tunnel? Is that pretty much what that would be? Or is there a better interpretation of that?
No, I mean, that's a great way to put it. That's a part of this construction of a reality tunnel, which that was Timothy Leary's term. So a reality tunnel, that would be a component of what constructs, say, a reality tunnel. Why, how are there reality tunnels? Really, which that means is, how is it that we can literally, two people can be in the same room and see two different rooms, right?
He had a really good example of it. This one stood out to me, and he was trying to describe this concept of a reality tunnel and two different people seeing different things. And I think he was also conflating a little bit with like quantum mechanics. And it was like a mundane example, which I think made it the perfect one. But and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, I'll paraphrase it, but it was in a talk where he mentioned that he was trying to figure out something to do with where he lived, or he wanted to get like a permit. And he writes in and he finds out that technically where he was living wasn't really in the county that he thought he lived in. and they directed him to some municipality. So then he writes the municipality, and the municipality is like, well, technically you're not within our municipality either. You're in this like other district that wasn't fully like sort of acquired by either of these different government regulatory, like sort of abstract boundaries. And he makes this point like, this is me in quantum state. Like, I am both in the county and not in the county. I'm both in the municipality and not in the municipality. Like, it depends on which sort of rule book that you're following at that time as to whether or not you're in this quantum state or not. And he makes a really compelling point that even this idea of quantum state and quantum mechanics, it's only within the realm of our own definition of it. Like, you couldn't be in this quantum state unless someone had written what a quantum state is, and then you decide like which check marks you fill in. And that the way that I interpret it is he was kind of saying that it's not a literal or specific thing. You can't actually be in or out of this quantum state. All you can be is in or out of our definition of what the quantum state would be. So you're kind of always living within your own definitions of what things are. It gets really hard, but when he described it in the very mundane way, because I think everyone's been in a similar situation where you thought you were in group A and someone tells you you're in group B, and then you go over to group B and they're like, well, technically you're in group C. And you're just like, I guess I'm all of these things.
Oh, yeah, I love it. Which is like the heart of all great comedy, right? The surprise and like these maps that we have suddenly are not working. And the surprise of that, a laugh will come from that, if you will, right? Like, what? I'm not in A, I'm in B. What the fuck, or at least the way that Wilson is able to translate all of that. I think it's full of laughs. I love that scene. That's from a talk, I believe. That's a scene from Maybe Logic, the documentary Lives and Ideas of Robert Anton Wilson. That I believe that was Bob in Germany with the help of a friend of his translating. And of course, Bob speaking with this heavy Brooklyn accent. And that translator was great too. That lady, she was really funny because she's communicating, both with a heavy German accent to the questioner, and then just breaks it down very New York like to Bob, which I thought she was really funny. And I think her name is Nancy Durrell. She still lives in Germany, I think. I spoke with her. I love that. I love that part. And that's, Bob illustrating so in such a, erudite and funny way, the idea of quantum uncertainty, right? The position of where the electron is, depends on when we look at it, when we measure it. So within that quantum realm, if we follow these wild theories, like from, was it John Wheeler, the uncertainty principle, that we can't predict where the electron is going to be, which contradicts classical physics, which allows us to do things like fly airplanes. Like, we can predict the position of an atom, an electron, an object moving through space and time based on the classical laws of Newtonian physics. Now that we can't do that in quantum physics, this presents a problem, because an airplane, we know, will take 7 or 8 hours to get from this place to that. We can understand where it's going to go. That's logical, that's rational. But when an electron suddenly appears here and there, it seems magical and shocking. And all that we can say is that it exists in potential, in potentia, and that it's sort of this relationship to the observer or the instrument making the observation of where it's going to appear, which is so mind-boggling. And for, these discoveries in quantum physics were made in the 1930s. So for the next decades, all these great thinkers were contemplating the ontological effect of such discoveries. And Wilson was all up in that mix. He hung out with a whole generation of physicists that were questioning what are the implications of the reality of these discoveries that these people like John Wheeler and Erwin Schrödinger and Albert Einstein and all these great minds were coming up with in the early part of the 20th century, along came these wild hippies in Berkeley in the mid 70s who were finally getting to the meat of the matter and looking at, again, the ontological implications of quantum mechanics when, like, as you said, something could just like appear out of nowhere. So to just kind of tie it in real quick to Prometheus Rising again, like Wilson, like he introduced me to this discussion and conversation of quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement. In Prometheus Rising, he uses the term non-local theorem and Bell's theorem, but Saul Paul Sarag, Wilson's friend from the 70s and like an extremely intelligent like particle physicist who was like told me so many things about quantum physics, mentioned to me how it became quantum entanglement became the term, which is essentially the same thing as non-local Bell's theorem, which means that, two particles are entangled, through space and time. It comes from a 1935 paper from Erwin Schrödinger. And so, Wilson is I mean, here you go. I mean, here's a writer who's writing about the Illuminati, which you could find that discussion in many, bookstores, but then he's talking very adroitly, very intelligently about cutting edge discoveries being made in quantum mechanics. As Saul Paul Sarag told me, Wilson is the first popular nonfiction writer to actually present the experiments from John Clauser and Ilan Aspect to do it correctly in a book. That's before any physicist did it. That's before Fritjof Capra or anyone really talked about these specific experiments, right? Wilson is the first one, and he did it correctly because some physicists talked about it in a previous book, but they did it incorrectly. Bob, a non-physicist, a zany stoner intellectual, countercultural, weed smoking, acid taking, magic making, funny guy, is the one that gets it right. But scientists did not give him much props for doing that at the time. As I put in my book, he didn't get much props for getting this right.
And more importantly, he was able to do it in a way that like a layman could understand these very complex theories that even the mathematicians and the physicists that were coming up with this like theoretical sort of quantum mechanics, they didn't know how to describe it to a layman. They could give you a bunch of formulas and a bunch of numbers, but for Robert Anton Wilson to be able to not only understand that, but then convey it to a completely different audience. In my mind, that's almost the hallmark of true understanding, of being able to take a complex concept and then re-describe it into a completely different genre and a completely different demographic and have the information transfer with very little data loss.
Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah. And in that regard, Wilson was a huge fan of Friedrich Nietzsche, not so much Nietzsche's idea of the Superman or anything like that, or Übermensch or none of that. It was more Nietzsche as a linguistic philosopher. Nietzsche is someone who, because Wilson was super, interested in linguistic philosophy. It was a major part of his whole career. And, Nietzsche made it, clear to him. I remember reading this Nietzsche quote somewhere, and I'm going to paraphrase, but basically Nietzsche is saying, it's like, what worth is all your knowledge if you can't explain a topic to like the simplest of minds, if you will. Of course, Nietzsche speaks like that, right? Like, but meaning communicate to all, try to be as communicative to as many different people and levels of semantic intelligence as possible. This Wilson is an egalitarian philosopher in the sense that, he writes in an erudite, clear, concise, one could say very American type of way, influenced by, Ernest Hemingway and the pragmatists, in that get the point across, man. Don't cut to the chase. Subject, predicate, noun, verb. I wouldn't say subject, predicate, but, unfold the imagery, make the connection, let's keep it moving, And as a writer, I learned a lot from Bob as a writer, as an artist, as a constructor of words in that regard, because Wilson is part of a tradition though, right? He's, as William Burroughs said, like cut out the flowery language, and Ezra Pound, another influence in terms of his writing. Ezra Pound created this imagistic movement, which is basically don't get lost on like abstract words, right? Create clear, concise images so the viewer, reader can see it and make the connection and keep it moving. And that's Wilson, always keep it moving, get to the point. So you could throw another point in there and also a joke or two. And Wilson is dancing, man. He's dancing a jig. You know, he's you know, like James Joyce was a singer, right? And you hear it in his words, how lyrical and sing-songy he is, right? You can hear James Joyce read his own work, Finnegan's Wake, and there's all the same ha-di-da, ha-li-la, ho-lo-ho-la-la, all that sort of thing, right? So, you know, right? But Bob, he's not much of a singer, but he's dancing, you know, and if you view him like that, he's breakdancing. This guy's hitting all the switches, 6 steps, all that. He does something very interesting as a writer and exciting in that he's constantly practicing the dialectic. He's constantly creating synthesis. He's taking a thesis, presenting an antithesis, and creating a synthesis, which Marx did not create the dialectic. The dialectic was created by Hegel. It's a very powerful philosophical tool, and it's an aid in thought and thinking. And, Wilson, to kind of touch back on what was just briefly said about the idea of, where he was living, right? Like Capitola, Santa Cruz, like in that talk in Germany and whatnot, as to illustrate quantum physics. He said that he lives in Capitola, but he lives in Santa Cruz, but then when he called the police, he was told that he lives in the municipality of Capitola and only they can help them, et cetera, et cetera. It's also a comment on like bureaucracy, right? Like of how you just need some simple help. What it was his car got broken into and he needed to just file a report and figure out who to call, right? And of course, he takes it to that, I think, a hilarious level of finding a connection with quantum physics, because ultimately where it goes with Schrodinger's, the idea of Schrodinger's cat metaphor, scientific theory, which is a comment on uncertainty. You put a cat in a box and you put a poison pellet in, and at some point the cat's going to die, right? At which point is the cat dead, right? When you open the box, or did the cat die sometime before that? Pretty cruel to cats, if you ask me, but this is where those guys went at that time, right? And it was a thought experiment. Who knows if anyone ever tried it? But the point being to Schrodinger is that the cat is only dead when the viewer views it. That's the only instrument. Now we have cameras, of course, we could do, but that's an instrument, right? And it all comes down to we can only describe something through the measuring instrument. And the quantum uncertainty exists in every measurement. So we can now put a camera in the box and see when the cat dies, but the cat doesn't die until we view it. We don't register it as dead. So it's called Schrodinger's catastrophe theorem or theory, that it ultimately comes down to the consciousness of the individual who reads the measurement that can finally see where the electron is or make a definitive statement. But then when it's a catastrophe because it's an interior collapse. The more you look at your interior consciousness, the further and further these things go. Where does causality exist? And this is a major part of Wilson's work, I guess, as a philosopher. He's going into the whole notion of causality. What causes what? In an old Newtonian physics universe, A causes B, causes C, causes D. We have a linear progression, and you could say history is progressing to some great omega point, right? But then when you look at things through a quantum physics realm, and he does this very brilliantly in his book, Schrodinger's Cat Trilogy, and he forms a star, because A could cause B, B could cause C, C could cause D, but another loop could be, D could cause C, C could cause B, B could cause A, and we're in a whole new realm because of, superposition and the potentiality of where the electron is. And if our consciousness acts the same way, things get very weird, right? And Wilson eventually, he purports a theory to support his viewpoint, which is that ESP, telekinesis, these two things, remote viewing, these things are not BS. These things are possible, and everyone can potentiate these things and activate these an ESP within yourself. I don't know about telekinesis, but definitely remote viewing and whatnot. We have a psychic capacity within all of ourselves. He was exploring this heavy in the 1970s. And this is what the second 4 circuits of the 8th circuit model of intelligence were about. Like one of them, you kind of gain access to sort of like a psychic sort of ability. And this is, like a further exploration of consciousness for Wilson, where he goes and he finds the quantum explanation for this. Why something like ESP can exist? Well, this is because quantum entanglement could possibly make this possible. Because when unit A changes, unit B changes simultaneously, it violates the speed of light, which is everything is based on Einstein proved, like movement in this universe can only move according to the fastest is the speed of light, right? 140,000 miles an hour or whatever, right? Like, so this quantum entanglement, this Bell's theorem, A and B change at the same time. There's a simultaneous faster than light change, right? And so that's what all these people have been, all these smart minds, great minds have been questioning ever since then. I mean, Einstein did it as well. Like, this violates all the known laws of nature. This God doesn't play dice with the universe. This is spooky action at a distance, said Einstein. This is impossible. Otherwise, it completely contradicts all rational and known things that we know about the world. All our sciences are based on this sort of logical A causes B causality sort of thing. But now we enter this new realm where causality seems to be in the state of potentia. Things become a lot more possibly confusing. And so it's great to have a writer like Wilson, who was really able to take all these heavily jargonized studies like quantum physics, general semantics, areas of Buddhism, mathematics, and communicate them in a very simple, he stayed in touch with his Brooklyn laconic drawl, a very simple way to just break things down to people at their level. And I think that's a great trait and ability of his work. I sought to do that as well in my book. Like, I really made it a point. I want to make this book accessible to readers who've never even heard of Robert Anton Wilson. Like, and I feel pretty confident that I accomplished that I told a story quite simply of a man who chose to live a life as an artist in America. I mean, that's what he was. He produced novels and books. He's an artist. He's also a philosopher and also a psychedelic philosopher and thinking about conspiracy theories, but he dedicated his life to creating artifacts that are known as books. He's an artist, right? What does that entail? And that's why his life was a chapel perilous, a walk through chapel perilous, because to live as an artist in America is not easy. And it's become even more difficult since the 1980s, at least, when the Congress started stripping funds to the National Endowment of the Arts and other areas of art. And Wilson is a great, map maker for all of this stuff. You can find it in his work, but most importantly, you can find all this in my book. I made a huge effort to take all of his work and just streamline it into a clear, consistent narrative. And while staying true to his ideas, also criticizing them and showing through time with new information that we have, different things that are contradictory. Like, Wilson didn't want a hagiography. He didn't want, he wanted warts and all. And like, all great artists deserve, all great people, everyone deserves a biography with warts and all. He's a humanist in the sense that the only way you can really learn about humanity is learning how other humans live. You don't get it in some holy book. God communicating to whoever so-and-so in some cave comes down from the mountain. I channeled this from God. No, you learn from how other people lived. And this is how we will hopefully achieve what he called a non-zero sum society, a world where people could, live truly freely and also in kind communication and community with each other. It seems to be a very different world than what we see on the TV and the news all the time. However, Wilson was great at drawing your attention to your immediate environment. Just because that's happening on the news, that doesn't mean that you're powerless and you can't make your own personal space and vicinity a beautiful place and really curate. Nietzsche said something about that too. He's like, curate your friends, understand your environment. Like, you want nutrition, you want to, but Wilson is also not, he also realizes that one could also be a cosmic schmuck. So you might think that you're curating your friends, but you could just be an elitist asshole. So,
or surrounding yourself with CIA assets.
And then surround yourself with CIA assets. Yeah, I'm open to dig into that more too, because that's also a very interesting thing.
To throw one extra, I don't want to open that back up. It's a little wild rabbit hole, but also it was interesting when you mentioned the link to the Red Squad in Chicago. Because and the Weather Underground breaking Timothy Leary out, because also one of the famous members of Weather Underground was Bill Avery, right? Bill Ayers.
Bill Ayers.
Who was also linked to that was one of the names that came up when Obama was running his campaign. And later, after the campaign, that was like, well, maybe this is another link between CIA, like Obama's CIA and Ayers' CIA and Weather Underground. It becomes really hard to untie. There's almost like a Schrodinger's box sort of analogy on that, right? Like, if you put Ayers and Obama in a box, are they both CIA assets until you open it, or what?
Right. I love that. That's a great point. I mean, that's a great question. But then when you have these questions, right, like, you have to activate a repertoire of critical thinking skills. Wilson, this was a big part of his work too, which he sought for his readers to gain the ability to know the difference between an assertion and an argument. He was very much influenced by Karl Popper, the scientific philosopher who created this thing called the theory of falsifiability, right? There are hypotheses, statements and claims that can be made that can be tested, right? You could say, it's raining outside. And then, we were living in the same space. It's raining outside. Okay, I'll go check. It's not raining outside. Oh, okay. Well, we found out more information. Or, you're right, I confirm your finding. It's raining outside. That claim can be tested, right? Some claims can't really be tested in the scientific sense. That God exists. You can't test that. You can't put that in a laboratory, no matter how we intuitively feel. You just can't test that. So there are certain, so then to argue about whether God exists and then your interpretation of God being superior to someone else's interpretation of God just brings you back to caveman era, where you're bashing rocks on each other's heads.
Right. Or even if you just say it's nice outside, that could be just as hard to prove either way, right? Because now you're talking about some sort of a subjective experience that you got to spend an entire hour defining what your quantitative and qualitative version of nice is.
Right. Well, I mean, I think generally, though, this is where, exactly. Some people, maybe they like it when it's raining, or some people it's nice out when it's sunny. I think this is where we fit into a sociological sort of range of how most people think when it's nice out. Or you could also be speaking to a person with borderline personality who just likes to argue with people all the time. So it could subjectively be and objectively be nice out, but they're talking to you, it's not nice out,
Right.
So,
if you're a contrarian, then I guess it would be hard to pin them down because they just want the conflict.
Right. Exactly. But this is all where I think Bob's work is extremely valuable, because Bob encourages individuals, get out there, man, engage with life, interact with these crazy, kooky, wild, groups and people, but have your knowledge of self in order, your center, and be centered, and have your critical thinking skills on point to realize and when to know to move on. And one does not even need to be like, oh, this is total bullshit. I can't believe I was taken in by this bullshit. It could just be simply a vibe. Like, I'm not feeling this anymore. I'm going to follow this, my own inner into like moving here and just keep it moving. Take care, guys. Bob did that a number of times in his life, and you gain wisdom from that, but to speak on, like, let's just take the claim right now of like Bob was surrounded by CIA assets. Prove it. Who is the CIA assets? Because now we also live in this age too, where a suggestion, it's all part of the bad jacket. Social media brings apart, like, it's like micro bad jacketing that goes on all the time now, and the movement of the onslaught of imagery, which could be information or mis or disinformation, people are losing their ballast with that. And it's harder and harder to tell. This is why you really need to learn the difference, or Bob would encourage readers to know the difference between an assertion and an argument. And this is the difference between Wilson and QAnon. Quite simply, right there.
I'm glad you almost beat me to that. That was my last big question for you. Would be like, what do you think Robert Anton Wilson would think about the QAnon movement?
I think that, I think that he would have definitely studied it because of the similarity in format or stylistic structure, in the sense that how QAnon, whoever Q was, gave out its sort of information was all in the form of questions, right? And so, as I think Zach De La Rocha said it, the power of the question. The question works very well in this new media age that we live in, like invoking Marshall McLuhan, which Wilson was very well versed on, this, amazing champion and understander of media ecospheres, Marshall McLuhan. And McLuhan knew the difference between hot and cool. Like, when we live in a hot media space, it's better to keep a cool face. When you live in like a cool media space, sometimes it's better to be hot. And the only difference between hot and cool is this is a hot media that we're in, because you see people's faces, you hear the voices. So people will practice. Film actors know this. Robert De Niro said, when in doubt, do nothing. That's why you see a lot of film actors, they have no expressions now because they're not doing absolutely anything. But stage actors will be loud because you have to perform to the back row. And generally, stage actors may not read well on camera because they're too hot. Tupac was hot. Tupac was, making all sorts of, I'm using old references here, but what happened to Timothy Leary was hot. He was hot in a hot media space, but he learned from Marshall McLuhan to put on a happy face, because this put out a wild image. So that's why you always see Leary smiling, especially that famous image of him being arrested. He has a huge smile on his face, because this was a strategy, a publicity strategy, kind of never let them see you sweat in a way. But point being, in hot and cool media spheres, the importance of basically keeping a cool mind in some ways. This may not be according to McClellan. This is my take. But Wilson adds to this idea of just keeping a cool mind in the sense of, it's very simply, just before you start retweeting or reposting this wild story, which you haven't even read. I do this too, but it's just that headline, oh shit, yeah. But it's like, wait a minute, take a breath, read this and understand what it's about. What's it really saying? And just have a deeper understanding of not just your own perceptual grid, but also how these media spheres, everyone has a point of view, right? And some people want you to have their point of view too. And some people will ask you to have their point of view, and some people will try to coerce and manipulate you to have their point of view too. Wilson's work, Prometheus Rising being another great example, is just a great reminder of your own power of perception and your ability to make sense of all this information coming at you. He would often say, like, the most important power that we have is the ability to say no, right? So that's a big deal. You're claiming agency then by saying no. And you then, if you're able to say no in a moment, later on, you don't think, oh my God, I was totally manipulated. How did that happen to me? And then you have to prove to all these people that you were manipulated and all this. And people are like, you're full of shit. You're just fucking trying to do this. Like, if you have the wherewithal in the moment, and this is why he's like an intellectual sensei, like those 8 circuits model of intelligences that again is found in Prometheus Rising, to stay on that, that's like the 8 belts of a dojo, white, blue, yellow, was it white, yellow, blue, red, green, and then you get to the black belt and you're understanding how quantum entanglement like throws everything up in the air. But staying on that book, like he invokes also the work of Ilya Prigozhin, who studied dissipative structures. Prigozhin was a chemist, I think. And the idea of dissipative structures is before something changes a state, there's a high level of sort of chaos. There's a high level of movement, and Terence McKenna would touch on this too. Like there's a high level of novelty, right? So things are becoming more complex. This doesn't necessarily, and it becomes that either a question, is this a breakthrough or a breakdown? Are we achieving something better or something worse? This is the eternal question that every generation of humans while we're alive must ask. When we're dead, we don't have to ask that question anymore. But this is like an obsession that humans constantly have. Even during the time of Plato, there were people grumbling about the youth and how lazy and stupid the youth were. So this is a trope in humanity. Like,
and the books were corrupting their mind. I can't believe they're all just reading these horrible books and getting these horrible thoughts.
And so and that brings in an interesting conversation about communication technologies and the idea of technology in general. I mean, there's certain mind states. There were like Christian fundamentalists who thought that lightning rods were the work of Satan, right? So, there are, religious sects that don't take medicine, and they think Christian scientists, they'll just pray around you. Larry David and the great Richard Lewis have a, funny comment on that on a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, where Larry David's going out with a woman who's a Christian scientist, but she won't take medicine, et cetera, et cetera. And Wilson is such an interesting mind who is constantly bringing in the paradox. He called himself an agnostic Gnostic. He'll like Nietzsche, he'll give an argument for one part of the polarity, one area, and then he'll bring it back and sort of, maybe suggest or argue another polarity. So he's a rationalist. He's asking you to develop your critical thinking skills, but then at the same time, he's talking about remote viewing and then having these wild experiences and whatnot. But by the end of Prometheus Rising, he seeks to bring a final synthesis with all this wild stuff through his discussion of quantum entanglement, that faster than light communication. It hasn't been proven though, but theoretically in his mind was quite possible. And this makes it possible for ESP, remote viewing, telekinesis, et cetera, et cetera. And he does the job of a very good writer in that he's constantly producing thought through utilizing contrast, conflict, and other, saying novels, literary tropes. But in his nonfiction, he knows how to write a book, man. He knows how to create the desire to keep reading. And by the end of Prometheus Rising, I've had friends comment about this. I've interviewed people about this. He really does the job, man. He elevates your mind by the end of the book. Like, I haven't met many people who like threw that book down in disgust at the end of it. They put the book down, they took a deep breath, looked outside, and were like, wow, shit. Life is
challenging. It's an incredibly challenging book. Not that it's hard to read, but it's difficult to get through because it forces you to take different positions and think about things in ways that maybe feel uncomfortable, right? And make you go out in the world and actually do. I really, really love. I think that would probably be my number one suggestion for someone unfamiliar with Robert Anton Wilson. Would probably be Prometheus Rising.
Yeah. Agree right now. Definitely.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I totally agree. I think I love that book. I clearly remember, where I was when I read it, where I was when I finished it, and how, Wilson made you feel good.
I remember the day that I finished reading that book, I went outside and I found a $20 bill. I'm not even kidding. And it was like in a high traffic area where there were lots and lots of like transients that would walk up and down this high traffic road. And there was just a freaking $20 bill just right there. And it blew my mind. And I won't ever be able to shake that feeling of like, did that book manifest this $20 bill? Did I who put this here? I almost felt like Robert Anton Wilson himself like knew that I just finished the book, and he like ran out and he planted a 20 just for me to find.
That's so great. I love that, man. He had a magical, people share somewhat similar stories and these weird synchronicities that occur after reading one of his books.
Yeah, it is a synchronicity magnet for sure. I'm going to wind this down a little bit here. I want to be mindful of your time. I've got a little segment. Let me just play a little 10-second clip, and then I'm going to explain what's going to happen. You good?
Sure.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
Okay, these rules are pretty easy. I just want to get you to give me a 1 to 10 rating on some very definitive topics. And might be anti-raw in a way, right? Because I'm going to ask you to actually get off the fence and just pick a specific answer. So there's not a lot of maybe logic in here. You can inject it if you want. But for example, if I said, how much do you believe in a literal Bigfoot on a scale from 1 to 10, where would you put that?
5.
So, okay, so you could be swayed either way, plus or minus. Mm-hmm. How about the concept of flat Earth?
0.
How about little gray Roswell aliens, to be specific?
2.
How about a biblical Satan?
1.
How about angels and demons? Would that fall in the same line?
This is an interesting, this is a true or false sort of thing. Angels and demons, same line. I mean, yeah, also 1 in this, thinking in this regard of, yeah, I'll go 1.
How about dinosaurs? And to qualify dinosaur, like you go to the Museum of Natural History and someone points at the Tyrannosaurus Rex or something, and they're like, that was a real thing that existed. Where are you at on that?
9.
How about dragons? And I mean like fire-breathing, flying dragons, having existed at any point in history.
1.
How about the concept of hollow Earth?
2.
Well, how about a literal Atlantis, like a platonic Atlantis,
like the Atlantis that Plato talked about?
Correct.
Not just like a landmass that people would say.
Yeah, not just landmass, but like a some sort of a superior, community that had some kind of technology that just stank and was lost to time.
2.
Well, remote viewing being a real practice.
3. 4.
Go ahead.
4.
How about manifesting quarters on the ground?
4.
How about celebrity clones? And I don't mean like having a spare kidney. I mean, Jamie Foxx is acting up on stage, so go ahead and wheel out Jamie B or whatever.
0.
How about 9/11 was an inside job?
4.
How about gematria?
I don't even know. I mean, that's the practice of like reading numbers or something, like seeing sacred significance in numbers.
Correct. It would be basically deriving numerical values out of words and letters, and then those numerical values themselves being some other deeper meaning behind everything.
See, like some of these questions, right? Like even angels and demons and the idea of like Satan, like these are mimetic entities, as Phil Farber calls them, right? But I'm playing the game, man. So they could be real to you, right? But maybe not real out there. But
yeah,
real
I know. How
you.
real are they to you, though? To Gabriel?
Yeah, man. I mean, dude, a lot of these maybe I should have just said 5. I'm pretty open, but I've never experienced some of these things. But so gematria, right? Like, I mean, that's a real practice. That's people do that. I don't know what meaning they find, but that's a 10. I mean, people do that.
It's fair answer. How about the concept that AI is a vehicle for some other intelligence, meaning that you're not just talking, or potentially in 10, 20 years, whatever, that you're not just talking to like a numerical formula that gives you the most, anticipated answer, but that it's like a Ouija board of some kind.
So you mean like its own intelligence, or it's kind of being like the transducer for some other intelligence using it?
I would say more the latter. Like the gist of the question be more of the latter, that it's being a vehicle for some other actual intelligence and not just like a really fancy mechanical Turk.
That's great. I never really considered that before. That's very interesting. I don't know. Right now, one.
Magic. And I guess, Matt, you can interpret it however you want, but I mean magic in a way that not just you're giving yourself positive reinforcement so you're in a better mood, but like some sort of an objective magic.
Like manifestation and stuff like that. Like manifest. Yeah. By just making like a spell and not doing anything physical to attain it, right? Just thinking like, I
don't know. I don't know how to qualify that, right? Because some magic revolves around ritual and having, I don't know, magic potions and tinctures and stuff. But I mean that you can objectively change the physical world in some way that could be observable by someone that doesn't believe in magic.
Right, like the conscious change to one's environment through the power of will and whatnot. I mean, I believe in magic, but my definition of it involves, it's not how people would think of it, but this is really, I think, how magic is real. This is magic. You have to do everything in your physical capacity first to achieve something, and then you can't lust after any results just because you have a desire and you do this thing. There's no indication that it's even going to happen. So you can make a sigil for something, and there's just no telling that it might manifest. But Lon Milo Duquette said that, who is a magical writer, magic is like just basically utilizing like your imagination and your will to create something, a creative something, which so then that's brings it into the realm of art. So in that realm, I definitely believe in magic, right? It's a 10. But in the realm of ceremonial magic and then people, doing all that stuff. See, I've had actual experience though with things. So I've, it's all above 5. That's right now. Cause
it's a fair answer. It's a fair answer.
Yeah.
Here's a lot. This one's kind of a two-parter, so pay attention to the qualifications on the first one, but that a human being has stepped foot on the moon in the last 100 years.
Yeah, true.
So 10 true or 6 true?
Right, of course. 8.5.
Okay, now the follow-up is that the footage that we saw, I mean like our parents and grandparents, of the Apollo 11 mission in 1969, on a scale of 1 to 10, how valid do you think that footage was?
Well, I mean, this is a realm that I realize this is an area that, whole books are written about this, right? Dark Emission, right? Richard Hoagland, right? Like, the false moon landing footage. I've never really delved too much into that. I always leave it open that things could be fabricated, but was that filmed in a Hollywood basement or whatever? How true is that? 2. I think they really
2
went
that
there.
It was faked, or 2 that it was real?
2 that it was faked.
Okay, so an 8, roughly, that it was real.
8 that. Oh wait, yeah, the moon landing footage, right? Yeah,
right, the moon landing footage that got broadcast to the world, essentially.
I also just want to say that, like, these, you asked me these questions tomorrow, and these could be different numbers too.
That's fair. That's fair. I want to give you another chance to plug all of your stuff. Tell people the name of your book, where that they can buy it. And any promises that you want to make about like everlasting glory or riches from reading your book.
Oh man, thank you. Yes, for sure. Everyone could find the book, Chapel Perious: The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. Make sure, this is a big deal. Like if you can see it, you put in the ampersand. on the title. There was some confusion about the title, in other words. You can find it on Amazon.com and also Lulu Press. Also on my website, chapelperilous.us. I update a lot of stuff that I wrote about in the book, and then things that I did not get to include in the book, I will put on that website. And my Substack, again, that's I'm constantly updating that. That's Gabriel Patrick Kennedy. I believe it's .substack. I'm kind of new on that website, but if you Google Substack, Gabriel Patrick Kennedy, I should come up. The book right now is available in hardcover and I think all the paperback and Kindle. It's getting some really nice reviews from people, as I said. It's there for people who are really into Robert Anton Wilson, because I've uncovered a lot of new information about him. Even put his yearbook photo at the age of 18. That's the earliest photo of Wilson in there. A lot of new information. Like I said, the Red Squad files, just connecting a lot of dots in Wilson's life. I think that people who love and enjoy a nice, great story, a great biography, I think the book will appeal to them too. So it's really got something for everyone. Man, I just appreciate the time given to me today. It was really fun speaking with you about some of these things. And, I encourage readers to check the book out. And there's also forewords by Douglas Rushkoff and Grant Morrison, the comic book writer, the writer of the great book, The Invisibles. And I'm just very happy to finally get the book out and to share it with the world, man. Chapel Perilous, The Life and Ideas of Robert Anton Wilson. I think everyone should get it. And Promise of Riches and Great Glory. I can promise you great glory, but not riches.
Well, and I'll promise you the richest part, but you have to be pure of heart. So if you don't find them, it's kind of on you. It's not on either of us. That's your problem. For not being pure of heart. This was a phenomenal interview. We got to talk about so many cool There's a few that I had to leave on the cutting room floor, just maybe for a part 2, but I would love to a preview. I would love to talk about maybe the intersection of John C. Lilly sort of research and Robert Anton Wilson, especially the quantum psychology versus John C. Lilly's version of all this. Anyways, I don't want to open up a whole new can of worms. That would be a really fun conversation to have with you. I'd love to have you back, talk more about this book or any other future projects. Thanks again for your time. And of course, I'll put all the links to the Substack and the books and Lulu Press and everything in the comments.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was great to be here.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble dribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain, give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real, you will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hate, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Matters not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when the beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.